Hey everybody, just wanted to take a quick moment to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Genuine Fantasy Press, which is so appropriate because of my guest today. His name is William King, and he is Genuine Fantasy Press. And he's currently giving away a free version, 125 free pages of the Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening over at genuinefantasypress.com. It's a book for 5th edition D&D that is about warlocks and so much more. It contains 34 new subclasses, 17 new warlock patrons and familiars, over 175 new spells and invocations, 10 new races, and so much more. The paid version has 190 pages of new content. The book is designed to work with both classic and homebrew settings and gives you new ideas for your game world. It is an incredible book. Go check out the free version. It's got beautiful full color artwork, and you can get the paid version internationally in hardcover on Amazon. Check this out. It is so cool. If you do not love playing warlocks, you will after you read this. If you love playing warlocks, you have to check out the Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening from Genuine Fantasy Press. Genuine Fantasy Press, inspiring adventure. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I'm talking with the one and only William King. William is just an incredible individual who is making all kinds of great game design stuff. He was on here earlier to talk about warlocks and the Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening. Now we're going to talk about designing subclasses whole cloth. Here's my conversation with him. All right, everybody. Now I am here with a master game designer and my friend, William King. William, for people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the tabletop role-playing game industry?
Well, hi, everybody. I'm William King. I am Genuine of Genuine Fantasy Press, and I have most recently completed the Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening, what a lot of people call the Warlock Bible. So if you are interested in any kind of otherworldly patrons or anything weird like that, then you should definitely check it out at genuinefantasypress.com. But other than that, I do subclasses, I do races, I do pretty much everything that you could ask for in the game design sphere.
Mm-hmm. And you've been doing it for a long time, right? Last time you were on the show, we talked about sort of how you got your start and in Discords and Reddits and that sort of thing. And you've just sort of, I guess because you're fearless, you have pushed through and jumped in with both feet and you know a ton about game design. And I do want to encourage people to go check out the Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening, and you can find a free version of the product that is enormous. This is the biggest free version ever of anything that has amazing art and awesome full color stuff. But yeah, just recap your background a little bit for us here.
So when I got started, like many people, I experienced extreme hubris. One of the things that I decided was I'm going to make my own system and it's going to be so great. And it turned out to be absolute garbage. But I learned a lot about what not to do. And so then 5th edition came out very shortly after, I got into 5th edition very shortly after. And I thought to myself, hey, this is really cool. Everything's all set out nicely, and you can make stuff, and it can be like individual prepackaged segments, and it'll just fit right on in. Great. And so then I tried to make a class off the bat. Again, hubris. That didn't turn out well. It was a port of the Soul Knife, but reimagined for 5th edition. It was a psionics class from 3.5 Pathfinder, and that didn't go well. But then I said, okay, I really need to just sit down and get good at something. And so I started writing warlocks. And I did that for a while. I did 17 different warlocks over the course of an extended period. I released that as the original Compendium of Forgotten Secrets. Everybody loved it, but it needed more improvements. And so I went out, I got more experience. I did more clerics. I did an entire thing on those. I did some things on druids. And then I came back to Forgotten Secrets and I thought to myself, I can really make this into something cool. And so went, got all the art for it, redid the balance entirely. It's all the themes are the same, but the document's effectively entirely new. And after going through that process so many times, it's amazing how nice you can make something if you just continue to polish it. I think that's one of the really key things that a lot of people may or may not truly understand, is that it doesn't necessarily matter how bad it starts out. Practically every concept is redeemable. There are very few things that you can say, I'm going to make an X, and everyone's going to go, no, just don't do this. Don't do this at all. There's no possible way to do it. For pretty much everything, there is a way to do it. It might be hard, it might be tricky, but you can make something really neat and elegant if you keep polishing it. And so that is what I have tried to do. And apparently, it is one of the more popular third-party things that is not Kobold Press right now.
Yeah, it's great and it's beautiful, and we did like a real deep dive into this on an earlier episode of Tabletop Babble that I encourage people to go check out over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, where we talked a ton about warlocks because there's so much warlock stuff in here, but there's also a healthy number of non-warlock subclasses in here as well. So today, one of the things I want to talk to you is about subclass design, because especially in 5th edition D&D, it feels like there is a lot of room to play there, but it's also one of the trickier aspects of the game to design, right? When we think about designing different character options, kind of backgrounds are a great place to start because they always have generally the same components, right? The background feature is like maybe the trickiest part, and you go from there. And then I would say races are a little bit more tricky than backgrounds, probably a lot more tricky than backgrounds. And then I think a subclass is even trickier to do than a race. So let's talk a little bit about subclasses and walk me through your process. Like, how does it start? Does it start with an idea? Does it start with crap, I need a subclass, what am I going to do? How do you work it?
So when it comes to designing subclasses, they're definitely step 3. You've got step 1, which is like backgrounds and magical items and that kind of things. Like you can pretty much do whatever with that. Races are step 2. It's there's a formula that you can use. It's called detect balance. It's very nice, and it'll pretty much tell you like, okay, it has allotment for this amount of things, and if you have this exact amount of things, you're golden. If you have more, it needs to be just a little bit, and if you have less, that's fine. But subclasses, when you're getting into that, the real key is to have an idea when you start with it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that your idea is going to look the same as everyone else's. I did a very, very interesting experiment that I'm excited to push out in the next few days, where I was talking to a friend of mine who also is another home brewing kind of fellow, and I was remarking that his stuff was really cool and I really liked it, but it always looked a lot different from what I would expect. He did a ghost raging barbarian. It was really neat, but it was very different from the spirit guardian thing that is in Xanathar's. But I was looking at it and I was like, this is really cool, but I wouldn't have done it like this at all. And so we thought to ourselves, how can we test this? And so what we did is we got together and we decided to do non-vampire blood sorcerers. So just any blood sorcerer. And another like 8 people joined in. So we had 10 of these things. And all of them were completely different despite having the same theme set. Mechanically, they were different. And so when it comes down to it, what you have to do is you have to start with the theme. Theme is everything. If you can have something that's really cool and like, yes, I love this flavor, then the mechanics that support that flavor are going to follow from it. So when you're starting to design a subclass, what you need to do is pick a topic. And the topic needs to have more than just one idea behind it. So, for example, when I was doing my blood sorcerer that was not a vampire, I thought, okay, what is a thing that drinks blood that is not a vampire? Okay. And so, Chupacabra, right? Familiar with El Chupacabra, the goat drinker, the thing that supposedly lives down in Mexico and sucks the blood out of the livestock and eats all their internal organs without opening their skin and leaves them hollow. And so I thought to myself, that's cool. That's really dark and edgy. Let's do that. So once you've got that idea and you've got 2 to 3 themes, that's the key, is to have a solid core theme and then little subsections that you can take it in a direction. Because what I noticed was that when we did our experiment, all of the other people had chosen different sub themes despite having the main theme. One guy, for example, did a sorcerer who was using the metal in blood as a weapon. And so it got a kind of lance sort of attacks kind of thing, and the ability to cause enemies to explode and have their blood blades arc out. It was very neat and cool. But he had taken the sub themes in a different direction. I think that's the really fundamental aspect of all of this, is that even if it's already been done by someone else, by the official books, you can say, I'm going to take this in a different direction and do it differently and emphasize different sub themes.
I like that. And one of the things I think is fascinating about subclasses is I sort of see this debate about how broad or how specific subclasses should be, right? So, like, classes, I think, tend to be pretty broad, especially if you look at the ones in the player's handbook, right? And if you look at sort of the core 4 that are in the basic rules, those are super broad, right? Like, a fighter is probably the broadest class there is. And then within subclasses usually can fit a couple of different sort of ideas, but not nearly as many as the class can. So how broad or specific do you like to get when you are designing a subclass?
Here's what I try and aim for when I'm doing subclasses. I aim for it needs to be specific enough to evoke a particular image without saying this is the only possible image that you can use this for. So, for example, when you are creating a subclass, what you need to do is think, I have this piece of art, or I have this musical song, and I have this this particular thing that has inspired me. I want to make something that is like this. And so you can say, I'm going to make a character that has these particular traits. And that's the kind of person who would be attracted to this particular subclass. Like, for example, you're not going to have a barbarian who's going to be really calm and just kind of a passive dude all the time. No, like, they're going to have rage. At some point, they are going to have rage. And so at the same time, when you're doing a subclass, you're not going to make a subclass where the person is going to go, well, I really like everything about this, except I don't like the core theme at all. It's like, no, the person who's going to choose that is going to pick a specific thing. So what you want to do is you want to make something that is sufficiently specific as to evoke the visual that you're trying to get across, because someone who is interested in that visual is going to pick that subclass. If they don't like the visual, they're not going to play the subclass to begin with. Or they're going to subvert it so heavily that they may as well have done their own thing, and that's perfectly fine. That's great.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Those are great guidelines and great ways to think about subclasses. And it's also, what you were saying earlier about, like, you may have an idea for a subclass that has already been presented, but you have a different idea, like a different way to take it, then go for it. I also think that's great advice, right? If you're thinking about, like, oh, I wish that, the dragon blood sorcerer worked this way, then give it a shot and throw something down on paper and see how it works. When you are looking at subclasses for balance, how does that work? What are you paying attention to? Because subclasses, the abilities tend to be varied in not just in their power, but in their use too, right? Like something that maybe doesn't seem super powerful in combat could be a very powerful tool for exploration or social interaction.
Right. So what I try and look at is it really depends upon the particular class. Every class has a different allotted budget at a different level. So, for example, at 3rd level, when barbarians get their subclass, they probably have the single highest power budget right there of anything. Like, you can pretty much put just about any feature that, like, would fit into the game right there. You can put that there. It'll fit, it'll work. But by comparison, rogues are very different. They usually get one feature that modifies their combat in some way, and it won't give them any more damage usually, but it'll give them a little extra something that's kind of neat. On the other hand, they also get a second feature which is going to give them some out of combat utility. And it's really interesting to see the degree that people will try and go in those kinds of different directions, what I try to look for is, will this line up with the other options that are available? 5e does it so that at each level of the class, it should compare approximately to an equivalent level in the class that's chosen another subclass. So the Thief Rogue and the Assassin Rogue should approximately line up. That's the goal. At 3rd level, that's where they should be. At 9th level, that's where they should be. And so what you can do is you can directly look at all of the other existing features in official subclasses, and you can point to those and say, okay, this is approximately as useful as that, as often as that. And one of the key things, especially when designing low-level features, is to make them very frequently useful. Because they're the kinds of things that you're choosing the subclass for. Like, we put on big, fun, fancy capstones on things like, oh, you get permanent flight as a Dragon Sorcerer. That's cool. But most games don't go beyond 10th or 11th level. That's as far as they go. And if you get there, you're doing well. The vast majority of the time, people are not going to get more than their 2nd subclass feature. You're probably a lot of subclasses have a feature at 6th level, and that's usually that's as far as you're going to get in most cases. And so really putting the absolute maximum emphasis on those first couple of features is going to really make your subclass good, because you can introduce some cool, weird, wild thing at the end, but most people aren't going to get to use that. And so it comes as like an eye candy sort of thing that brings you into the store, but when you get in there, there's nothing good. So really focus on those initial features and try to make them as thought-provoking and fun to use as possible.
And also sort of within theme, right? I find myself often, and especially when I'm working on a first draft of a subclass or something, that I'm like, ooh, this is a cool idea, and I might think it's in theme, but I'll show it to somebody and they'll say like, hey, this seems great and it seems balanced, but like it doesn't fit the theme of what you're talking about, right? And that's another thing that I find I need to keep in mind, because I become so obsessed with the numbers and get everything else right that it's like, oh yeah, but the picture that I'm trying to present to the player is not what I have presented here.
Yes, that is absolutely true. You have to make sure that you keep that core visual in mind. It's like, I want to play this character, and this is what feature I need in order to do that visual. Because it's a game of pretend at the end of the day. Everyone has to be able to see it.
I agree completely. So when you are working on a new subclass, you said, you like to polish. What does that look like? How does that process work? Because I think that is a really important part of game design, is going back, looking at it again and again and again. But how does that work? How much time is in between? What about your deadlines? All that kind of stuff.
Well, thankfully, I'm me alone, so I don't have deadlines except the ones I set for myself, which makes life great. But I know a lot of people aren't in that. So here's my advice on polishing. What you really need to do is find a good group of people who know what they're talking about. There are a lot of people who do not know what they're talking about, and that's okay. They're trying. But the goal for each individual designer should be, I need to find a group who is knowledgeable and competent in this area and will be willing to help me and is passionate in the same way that I am about these kinds of things. And when it comes to polishing, the goal is to step back. A lot of when I was new at this, I got bad about this in particular, but it was the idea that I've made this and it's great. You have to let that go. You've made something. It doesn't have to be great. It just has to be. And once it is, other people are going to have thoughts about it. And when they have thoughts about it, often they'll say, hey, you've got mistakes, you've messed up. And the reason that they're telling you is because they care. If they didn't care and they didn't want you to succeed, they would not say anything. So you should listen to everyone, even if they don't know necessarily what they're talking about, because sometimes they do. And when they do, you'll learn something and you'll be able to say, oh, I see what you're saying. This is what the wording is supposed to be. This is how this feature should be designed. I should simplify this. I should expand upon this. That kind of thing. There a lot of times what ends up happening is, especially when people are first starting out, is they'll write something and they know how it works because they've got the visual in their head and it's great. But they haven't written it out in such a way that other people are able to fully understand that. And that's the key, is getting the feedback of other people, because when 1,000 people have looked at something, they'll be able to tell you whether or not they understand it. Of the folks who read something, only 10% will interact with it in a meaningful way, and only maybe 10% of those people are going to be able to give you what you really need. And so trying to find as many individuals to look at something and get a big audience, when I started, I had 0 audience, believe it or not. Nobody knew who I was, and that's fine. You can start from 0.
But you found people, right? You found people to check it out.
That's the goal. Be persistent. Politely persistent.
Well, and part of checking it out too is, if you can find it and it's easy to do, well, I shouldn't say easy to do, but it's easier to do for things like adventures. If you're writing an adventure, right? It can be really hard to find someone to play test the stuff,
yeah,
which is like worth its weight in gold. If someone is willing to not just look at and read your stuff, but take it to a game and sit with a group of people willing to let them play it, that is huge.
Oh, for sure. Playtesting is one of those really difficult things, because a lot of times, especially when you're just writing, there's a lot of theory crafting that goes in and like really looking at it. But what you have to do is find people who have played more D&D than is healthy, but you find those people and you say, okay, you've seen it all, you've done it all. Is this going to cause a problem? Is this going to be fun to work with? And they'll be able to tell you yes or no for the most part. Obviously, playtesting is absolutely invaluable, and you can never have enough of it. But at the same time, there's a certain point where you have to say, okay, this checks out, and it should be easy to work, and it functions. And if difficulties are encountered, then they'll be able to work it out.
Yeah, and I was having this conversation the other day with some friends about how, like, when you have an adventure, right? If you run through an adventure 3 times at the table, you get a lot of good playtesting information. Even just once playtested like that, with you running it, who wrote it, that's great. But for something like a subclass, it really, like, you might not get a lot from one sort of playtest analyses. You need a lot more feedback in that ways, which is why it's good to get people who, like you said, have played more D&D than is healthy, and to get their eyes on it, right? To look at this thing and say, like, this is how this should be done. I definitely, here are the red flags I immediately see, and go from there, and to trust those people, especially if you have a lot of people telling you the same thing over and over again, right? Which is why you got to get more than one, because that is always very, very helpful. So when you are looking for ideas for subclasses, or I guess I should say, how do you get your ideas for subclasses?
When I was first getting started, one of the key things that I would do is I would say, okay, I want to do something that is an X subclass, and I want to have it have lightning. And so I would go on DeviantArt and I would look at art, just every piece of cool fantasy art that had lightning in it, and I would just kind of cruise through there, and I would look and I would see until something would catch my eye, and I would say, that is really cool. I love what that looks like. What would that be able to do? What would that give me? What would that, especially with warlocks, it was very simple because I would just be looking for big eldritch beasts. And I would say, okay, what kind of person would interact with this thing? What would they want? And what kinds of abilities would they gain from that? Look at them like when you were designing imagine you're designing a boss fight effectively. And you're going to say, okay, this is the theme of the boss. This is the kind of mechanics that they're going to have. And then you translate that almost into a player side of like, I'm a person who's going to be able to do all these really cool things. And if I have this theme, what are those cool things?
Yes, I like that a lot. I think that's a really cool way to do it, is to let art inspire you, right? Especially if it's art that maybe you can like purchase from somebody, because then you have a piece of art that will go with whatever it is you're doing. This is a little bit of a side trek, but are you a Stranger Things fan?
I am a Stranger Things fan. I'm excited for the third season. I think it'll be great.
Did you see the trailer that dropped the other day for season 3? Yesterday, I think it was.
Yes, I did. I looked at that. I thought it was pretty cool.
So spoilers for our listeners. Skip ahead like 30 seconds if you don't want to hear this. But that monster in there, you designing a warlock pack for that? Is that going to be a
probably not? I've sworn off warlocks.
Okay.
See, after doing 17 warlocks, I thought to myself, if I do another one of these, it's going to be too much. And so I've taken a step back, because they're like 3 times as much work as any other subclasses. Normally with subclasses, I can do like a first draft of one in about an hour and it'll be pretty decent. But like with warlocks, you have to do all the basic warlock stuff. You have to figure out the warlock expanded spell list, which is just the worst, because the fact that it's an expanded spell list and not free bonus spells is anyway. And then you have to do a bunch of invocations because everybody loves invocations. And then you have to do a familiar because everybody loves familiars. And then by the time you get done with all of that, it's like 3 times as much text as the standard. So I have done the warlocks. I'm good on them.
So what kind of subclasses are you looking forward to working on?
So let's see. I did the Chupacabra Sorcerer. That was fun. The Compendium of Sacred Mysteries Resurrection, which is going to be coming eventually, has been a really exciting time. I've pretty much gone through and given an entire new pair of subclasses to everything, and then even more for druids and even more for clerics. So it ends up with this absolute mass of different things. And one of the cool, neat deals with that is that when you are designing a subclass in a set of themes, so for example, one of the orders has fate as a theme, and so I did a fate domain cleric, and then I did a barbarian that is the sacrifice barbarian, a person who is marked by destiny that your death is going to be significant and mean something, and therefore you're going to be carried on to whatever that particular moment is in time, and so you're very hard to kill because of that. And you're angry at either the things that are in your way between you and your destiny, or at your destiny itself, but you're still going to end up there anyway. And so the difference in mechanics between those, you can take a single theme and do a lot of really weird mechanics with it. That was one of my favorites to do. And even then, taking that as an aside, so blood was a secondary theme on that. And then I moved over into a Red Reaver Rogue, which creates a blade out of their own blood and uses that. And one cool thing to do is look at abilities from previous editions. Absolutely everything is stolen from everywhere, so don't feel bad about that. There was one thing that I saw that fantastic artwork back in an old 3.5 Splat book, was the ability to touch someone and step through their blood to someone else and just kind of step out of them. And I thought, that is so cool. Just dive in and just boom, right out of the other guy. So you take that kind of theme and you put that in, and then you keep shifting over and exploring all of the different sets. Folks, there is nothing more fun than being able to take a lot of different perspectives on something and move between the different classes and see what a rogue who focuses on this would look like compared to a fighter or a barbarian or a wizard.
Hey everybody, just wanted to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Bible is brought to you by Kobold Press and the Empire of Ghouls, a 5th edition campaign from Kobold Press for characters levels 1 through 14. It takes your heroes deep into the realms of the undead. You can explore a kingdom of terror and blood ruled by vampires, and far below the earth in the Underdark, a mighty empire of ghouls. It's a massive 5e adventure campaign that will include new Underdark lore as well as tons of undead, monsters, magic, and more, with both an adventure book and a player's guide. Sign up for alerts when this Kickstarter goes live at koboldpress.com/kickstarters. It's the Empire of Ghouls, and it is incredible.
All right, back to the show.
Are there other classes that you think are challenging to design subclasses for, or easier to design subclasses for somebody who's just starting out and interested in subclass design?
I would say that there is an answer, but it really comes down to the person. With the folks that I hang out with, there's one guy, and he does like pretty much everything he does is bards, and another who does pretty much everything he does is paladins. And so those folks would say like, oh yeah, these are easy, they're fun, they're simple, you can just do them just like that. I struggle with paladins. I can hardly do a paladin to save my life. Like the ones that I've done, I'm happy with, but it's something about the structure doesn't feel right to me. By comparison, like as you saw, warlocks are easy to me. Clerics are pretty simple and straightforward. If I had to recommend one for people to just kind of get into and start with, I would probably recommend either looking at barbarians or at fighters. And the reason that I say barbarians is because, again, at third level, you can put practically anything that'll fit in the game right there. And so once you start doing that, you'll be able to kind of get a feel for looking at what the other options are and how you can compare what you've created to those. Because that's the real key, is comparisons that'll allow you to see if you're in the right ballpark.
Yeah, I think that's very true. You know, Paladins, one of the tricky things for me about Paladins is that level 20 capstone is part of their subclass, and it's always that sort of avatar form that they get.
It's hard to do something new that doesn't like pretty much be the same as something else, and not having a third level feature that is actually like a passive. Instead, it's always a channel divinity option, and so you're like, okay, well, they have cool channel divinities, but I really want to be able to give them the ability to knock back on hit or something, but you don't get that. You get a channel divinity. Here you go.
Yeah, what's interesting is it has more structure in some ways than some of the other subclasses, right? It says like, here are the things that are happening in other subclasses, and so, you know, it's almost like because it has more of a formula to it, it can be harder to design for it, especially if you're trying to do something new and different.
Yeah, that and writing oaths. Like, oh, well, this is semi-consistent and is adjacent to this, but wouldn't that be that? Oh, well.
Yes, very true. Very, very true. So have you taken a look at the Artificer at all?
I did look at the new Artificer. I was pleasantly surprised. I had low expectations given the first instance of the Artificer, but this newer one turned out quite a bit better. I was under the impression that they, if anyone's familiar with the word Gish, or the concept of the spell sword, the person who uses both magic and weaponry at the same time, that is like the hallowed half-caster of the arcane, which is supposed to be like the arcane equivalent to the paladin, that people try and make all the time, but it never works, and so it'll kind of come across as like, oh, well, what do? Well, they're a Gish and they use magic and swords at the same time. It's like, okay, great, you've done the thing that is where it goes, but it doesn't go. Anyway, the fact that they put Artificer in that slot by giving them like the weird halfway extra attack and giving them actual half casting, and then having the opportunity to fight in melee like that with the elemental weapon spell, that was just kind of curious to me. I thought that was neat, but at the same time, I don't know how it'll turn out in the end result.
Yeah, I think it's something I'm definitely eager to try and check out, and it has these two subclasses that I think also they sort of make interesting divergent paths in the Artificer, right? The Alchemist and the Artillerist. What did you think of those?
I wasn't a super huge fan of the Alchemist by comparison. Like, I did like that it had the familiar. That was neat. It really tied back to old school, like, core alchemy. Creating life was like the whole idea behind that. So here it is. But it didn't really push in the direction that I necessarily wanted. A lot of people were asking for like the equivalent of the Pathfinder Alchemist that throws bombs and stuff. I'm good with it not having that. But by comparison, when you looked at the artillerist had like everything. When you looked at its spell list, it was like, oh, every single one of these is a good, solid spell I would really want. By comparison, the alchemist didn't really have that. And when it comes to the features and how it works, I really think that if they're gonna go with the like summonable entity route for the artificer, as its subclass thing is like you make a thing, there you get it, there it is. It's going to need some really careful adjusting to make sure that it stays on theme while still doing that, because I don't want them to restrict it that much in terms of design. I don't want another paladin equivalent. Like, yes, that's good and all, but don't go too far in that regard. I'd like to see them push something that's going to open that up and say, okay, it is going to use spell slots, but it'll use spell slots in a way that isn't necessarily making a summoned creature.
So let's talk a little bit about your next project, which we've already touched on. It's about clerics and it's about druids, right? And how deep are you into this right now?
So I have all of the subclasses at least done first draft. Many of them are effectively upgrades from the previous Compendium of Sacred Mysteries that I had released and have now removed for the time being. But it comes across as the struggle of creating all of the lore and making all of it consistent and having all of the art and getting all of that into place. And so I've started trying to get art again, and that's coming along all right. But it's definitely going to be a significant period of time before I am willing to release this in an official capacity.
Well, that's like you said, you are a one-person shop for the most part.
However, I am my own self, but also Sacred Mysteries is going to have quite a bit more than Forgotten Secrets in the regard of I am getting together with a friend from Vorpal Dice Press who goes by the tag of Laynet, and he has created a Warden class, which is an elemental warrior, and that's going to be included in Sacred Mysteries. So you're going to get the full elemental nature thing going on top of all of the basic subclasses that you would come to expect.
Yes, yeah. I loved the Warden in 4th edition D&D. I thought was an incredible class, had a lot of awesome flavor, and was really fun to play. So I super look forward to seeing that as well. When it comes to class design, which is obviously even beyond subclass, how are your experiences there? Have you ever made a class?
Oh, yeah. So in Forgotten Secrets, I released as bonus content, if you purchase the full edition, the Weave Shaper, which is if you're familiar with the anime Kill la Kill, it's kind of like that. You effectively end up with a person who uses weaves of thread and forms them into weapons and forms them into armor and uses powerful arcane magic in a super martial way. And so you get these really neat, powerful effects that it very comes across as the like full over the top magical martial combat. But the initial release, I haven't released the new version yet, but it's now actually finalized. The mechanics end up coming across in this cool way where you get to do combo attacks, and they have cool, powerful finishers, and you get secondary sub weapons like cloaks of blades and that kind of thing. And so it really comes across as this. If you have played a fighting game in the past 8 years, then you will recognize something from this, and you'll enjoy it. But when it comes to class design, I think that there are a few things that a lot of people need to really remember. One is you need to have a solid theme. Remember, themes are key. 2, flavor is everything when it comes to classes. If you can't tell someone what it is in a way that makes them excited about it, then it's not necessarily going to be for them, but that's okay. But it needs to be open enough that you can say, okay, it is this, and here are the subclass options that are available for it that are broad enough and wide enough that we can have a whole lot of different characters coming from a single thing. even Paladin, which is notorious for being like, it's one note, it's the Paladin. You have your oath and you're going to smite evil. But there are so many different ways that you can take that. And that's the key with your classes, is saying, I'm not going to design a character, I'm going to design an entire category of people who fight in a particular way.
Well, we will have to have you back on, I think, to do a deep dive into class design. I would love to do that. But let's talk a little bit more about the next thing. So how is it when you are putting together something like the Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening or your next project? You have yourself, you maybe have some art that you're working with too. Do you lay out everything yourself?
Yes. Formatting is probably one of the most taxing, time-consuming things, but worthwhile. And you can't have a book unless it's laid out in a way that people will enjoy it. But it definitely takes a lot of time to get everything kind of set out in the proper fashion and make sure that all of the spaces are filled in and all of the pages are done. But it's worth it.
Nice. And what are you most excited about for your upcoming project?
I think the thing I'm most excited about is taking core religious themes and breaking them apart into a way that they can be reassembled into something that's really cool and unique, while simultaneously having just enough tie to things that people are familiar with that they'll say, oh, it's kind of like that, but it's not like that at all. And that's something that I'm really interested in opening and expanding, because a lot of times we get into this kind of sort of Greek pantheon kind of mentality where it's like, oh, okay, all the gods exist, and then we're going to worship them, and we have one life, and we go through it, and that's the end, and we know how it all works. But once you introduce, like, faith kind of comes out of D&D in a little bit of ways. You have we know the gods exist because they will smite you if you are not doing right, and we know the angels exist. Oh, look, there's one. There's a little bit less faith in that regard, but the key is not necessarily about the divines themselves at all. It's about the people. And I think that's one of the really important things that we need to remember when you're talking about religion in D&D and in any fantasy tabletop, is that people and religion are tied together by faith. And faith is created by belief. And you can only believe in something when you may or may not have a reason to think it, but you choose to believe it anyway. And not even a reason, but like factual backing to keep it up. So if you don't know what happens after you die, if you've been told a lot of things, but you don't know for certain, then you're going to have to believe in something. You're going to have to say, I have faith that this particular course of action is correct. And so when you have different thoughts about, for example, what is a good action and what will lead to me having a good afterlife, if there is an afterlife that is good that I can potentially have, what kind of society does that create? What kind of religious organizations will arise to deal with these issues and these problems? And that's one of the really important, fun things that I'm excited to talk about in Sacred Mysteries is there will be no reference to gods. It's like, I'm not going to tell you, oh, the god of fire is so-and-so and he likes burning things down. It's not going to be in the list. No, I'm going to say, hey, people who are members of the Ascended Tempest, and they think about flame pretty frequently because it has ties to their religious structure and their religious organization, and it deals their thought that I am going to be reincarnated an infinite number of times. My goal is to achieve perfection in my particular role. I may be the prince or I may be the pauper, but I will be the best prince or the best pauper, and I will always be reincarnated as one of those. And so by punishing someone very heavily when they do wrong, it will send that through their spirit. And so we will say, oh, this is what happens when bad is done. And by contrast, meditation and enlightenment and really looking into yourself allows you to be better at that particular role. And so the religious structures that emerge around that and the various thoughts and beliefs that people will have, that's the real key part. The gods can do whatever they want. They're gods. But the people is what matters.
Oh, you're blowing my mind. This is great. This is awesome. Well, William, I really appreciate you stopping by, and we're going to need to get more into this. So come back. We'll talk about classes. We'll talk more about the gods and divine magic and whatever you're doing next, because it's always interesting and it's always exciting. But before we go, where can people find you?
You can find me at genuinefantasypress.com. And you can find me on Unearthed Arcana when I'm around there. I haven't been a little bit. And you can find me on the Discord of Many Things. If you go to reddit.r/Unearthed Arcana, you will see there in the sidebar there is a Discord link, and you can go on there and you can ask for Genuine, and I will be there.
Nice. That's awesome. That's it. And it's great advice. William, really, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Of course. Anytime.
Wow, everybody, that was awesome. Thank you so much to William for coming on the show. You know, if you like tabletop babble and you like me, maybe you've been following World Builder blog too, I now have a Patreon. It's at patreon.com/Introcaso. You can check it out. There's extra content and surveys where you can help me decide where the content is going. Thank you to everybody who has donated so far. And if you want to sign up to be a patron, I super appreciate it. It's over at patreon.com/Introcaso. Another way you can help support the show totally for free and with only a little bit of a time investment, head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. Seriously, even if you're not using iTunes as your podcatcher app, odds are the app of your choice uses iTunes algorithms to rate and recommend podcasts to others. So go create a free account. It'll take you 30 seconds. Rate us. Rate all the other podcasts you love. We'll appreciate it. You leave us a 5-star review. I will read it out loud and credit the person who left it, like Blake Ryan 74, all the way from Australia, who left a review entitled Relaxed RPG Discussion. This review reads, "Great podcast for RPG discussing issues on and around the table, featuring boy next door James Introcaso. He clasps the dice with eager hands, close to the dew in lonely lands. Ringed with wary players he stands. The dungeon map beneath him leers. Beneath his DM screen he sneers. And like an epic bard, he cheers." Wow. Blake Ryan 74, a.k.a. Blake Ryan Batman. Thank you so much for this review. I think I have missed it earlier because it is from 2017. Thank you. People, I'm running out of reviews, so please go leave me one. All right, people, if you want to learn more about what I'm doing, I'm at worldbuilderblog.com and I'm at James Introcaso on Twitter. Also, you can check out The Demon Plague, a 5th edition actual play podcast right here on Don't Split the Podcast Network that I am DMing. It's a campaign that I wrote that is available for public consumption called The Demon Plague. Check it out. Lots of awesome moments in there. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget that RPGs are like sex. Hey everybody, the podcast you just listened to was brought to you by Elderwood Academy. Elderwood Academy are the makers of so many fine handcrafted products for your gaming table. I own 2 of their incredible spell books that I use to carry around my dice, pencils, minis, all kinds of stuff, and I get so many compliments on them wherever I go. But they're more than just that. They've got hex dice chests, they've got scroll rolling trays, they've got awesome codex dice towers, they've got dice catapults. There's so much great stuff over at elderwoodacademy.com, plus beautiful dice that you can use as well, and extra foam inserts for those incredible spell book boxes that I was telling you about earlier. Seriously, everything is customizable, amazing, and awesome. So go check it out at elderwoodacademy.com/don't split. That's elderwoodacademy.com/don't split.